Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Behind the App, where each month we'll be taking a deep dive into some of the coolest and most technical Salesforce Labs solutions. I'm Stephan Garcia, a Senior Developer Evangelist here at Salesforce, and I'll be introducing you to the creators behind some of these awesome apps. Now, if you'd like to interact with us today, feel free to tweet #BehindTheApp to reach out with any questions you have about today's session and what you think about the app. If you'd like to reach out after the session, or if you're watching this on replay, keep tweeting, like I said, #BehindTheApp, and we'll get to your questions. Now, if you've not heard of Salesforce Labs before, it's an internal program where Salesforce employees are encouraged to develop and build production-ready applications that are free for our customers. What's even cooler is if you're a developer, a lot of the code for some of these apps is posted to GitHub as well, so that you can interact, make some modifications, and really make these apps your own. If you'd like to learn about some of the newest and be the first to hear about these Salesforce Labs announcements, you can follow at Salesforce Labs on Twitter or on the App Exchange at sfdc.co/labs. Now, please check out some of these solutions and really support these builders who are building these apps for you customers. Now, like I said, welcome once again to this episode of Behind the App. In each episode, we're going to be meeting a Salesforce Labs builder, an internal developer at Salesforce who's built a really cool app for you. We're then going to demo the app and really take a technical walkthrough of the application so that you can get a good idea of what went into the app, how it's built, and why it does what it does. And then lastly, we're going to break that down and solve for X and take a look at 3 technical challenges within the app and really solve for them. In this episode, we're going to really be looking at the user interface and how some of those challenges were overcome in building out the UI for the app. We're going to take a look at the data and some of those data-driven challenges of the app. And then lastly, we're going to look at how this app was composed using Lightning Web Components. Now, we might as well introduce ourselves to today's builder. So I'd like everyone to welcome Paul to the program today. We have Paul Lucas, who's a lead engineer for Salesforce in Australia. Paul, could you let us know a little bit about yourself and your history with Salesforce?
Thanks, Stephan. Hi, everyone. My name's Paul Lucas, and I am a lead engineer at Salesforce. I've been working for Salesforce for about 4 years, 2 of which have been in QBranch, the team I'm currently in. And previous to that, 2 years in CSG, which is the professional services arm, where we implement Salesforce core products, app partner products, and also these brilliant App Exchange products.
Cool. Very cool. And what was your role? Did you say you were a technical architect on that team?
I was. So I was a technical architect. A lot of what we did, or what I did back then, was feasibility studies, making sure that the solution that we were promoting and recommending to the customer was going to work, making sure we were adhering to governor limits, all the fun stuff that you have to look after or consider when you're working in a cloud multi-tenant environment.
Cool. That's brilliant. I mean, it really shows that a lot of our developers have really good hands-on experience with the platform. Now, I know that it wasn't just you that built today's app. You had a whole army of people working with you, and I thought it'd be great to give the team a shout out.
100%. So definitely by no means was this a one-man effort. The guys that I work with are brilliant. They are a mix of developers and designers, and I'll quickly read out their names. Ellie, Derek, and June. They are developers as such as myself, and they helped build the final product. Rona and Mel, they are a mix of user experience, user interface, communications, and creative, and they helped build come up with the design, come up with the final assets, and also the brilliant video with which is a big part, as you will know, Stephan, a big part of the competition.
Yeah. And if you haven't checked out the video, please, everyone, once we announce the app, you have to go and watch the video on the App Exchange. I mean, the team's done a really good job of really getting their message across and making it fun and creative as well. I wish that I could have such a team when building out apps for the App Exchange and Salesforce Labs. I think it's great to see such a collaborative effort, something I'm sure we'll touch on later when we're talking about the technical challenges, but I think it's great to see that effort really put towards these solutions. A lot of people might not know that this large of a team has contributed to some of these apps. You mentioned QBranch earlier. I was personally surprised to find out what QBranch was when I joined Salesforce, but can you let us know a little bit about what QBranch is and what the team that you all work on?
Yeah, so definitely spoilt for choice coming into this team, because we do have such a diverse skill set. People from all walks of life currently work in QBranch. And so I'm just going to quickly cheat and read out our elevator pitch. So QBranch is a global internal agency designed to support the account team's success. We provide strategy, expertise, tools, and inspiration you need to solution better. We keep quality and scale at the forefront of everything we do. When you work with QBranch, you can count on us to be your true partner. So that's a mouthful. That's a that's a that's a maybe a 30-40 store floor elevator ride. But at the nuts and bolts of it is that QBranch is there to help the sales team win deals, right? Bottom line is whenever there's a compete, whenever there's a technical or creative ask from a customer for them to see what Salesforce can provide, QBranch will be there and has been there to help come up with the solution, strategize, and deliver.
I mean, back when I was working in the pre-sales part of the organization, from a technical perspective, we would lean on QBranch a lot when it came to really creating that story and that vision for a customer, and almost creating that last, final big picture that we were then going to work with the customer before they then sign on the dotted line and become a Salesforce customer. And I think it really helps bring that journey together. And I can't say how much help QBranch gives Salesforce as an organization. Now, do you or have you worked much with things like the keynote demos, or maybe some of the big presentations and demo assets that we see on stage at our presentations and conferences?
So appreciate you giving QBranch that shout out, Stephan. We really enjoy working with SEs and people such as yourself, who very good at solutioning, and I guess together that's why Salesforce is so successful. Your point on the keynote, we play a big part in a lot of Dreamforce keynotes, World Tour keynotes. We are very active when it comes to things like Salesforce Connections, all of those big marketing events where we work on, or there is a requirement to have a lot of booths and showcases. Definitely that's something that QBranch has adopted and is almost a first port of call when one of these big events comes up. There'll be requests for us to help, and that's when we get really busy those times of years.
Cool. I mean, I think it's brilliant. It's a side of Salesforce we don't normally see, and I think it's really cool to have you represented as part of the developers we're talking to as this series, and it provided a really unique insight into Salesforce Labs. And so now I'd like to shout out today's app, and that is the Lightning File Explorer. And I can't tell you how excited I was when I saw this for the first time, because I think it fills such a good product gap of Salesforce. Could you tell us a little bit about the app and sort of what it does?
Yeah. So it's, in a nutshell, it is a better file management experience. It was something that we sought out to provide customers at the very least parity on what they're already used to. So a file tree, being able to search, being able to categorize, you see that everywhere you see files. And when I say everywhere except for on platform.
Yeah.
And that's basically the gap that we wanted to close.
Of course, and not to diss files at all, but I think there's a real space for improvement here on the platform, and I think that this app really, really brings that. Can you let us know a little bit about the inspiration for the application?
Yeah. So it was when you implement a product, a solution that deals with files, it's actually not a nice to have, it's a must have. And so back when I was working in professional services, when we're also working on the larger deals and industries such as financial services and health life sciences, it's critical to business operation. And you don't realize, or customers don't actually bring this up during the sales cycle, because it's one of those things that you take for granted. But when they realize, hang on, there is a little bit of a functionality gap here, And the current solution before File Explorer was to look on the App Exchange or build something on your own. That doesn't really, that's not the answer they want to hear. So hopefully now installing this directly from App Exchange, which is, a production quality product, will not raise those questions anymore.
Yeah, I mean, coming from a public sector approach, like I used to work in a partner that did a lot of public sector implementations, and like document management is one of the number one asks that we see frequently in that instance. And then when it comes to sort of coming up with that solution on Salesforce, it's really hard to not build something from scratch or custom when it comes to managing files, because it does show a little bit of difficulty there on platform. So I think this is really cool, and I think this is going to be really useful to a lot of our customers. Now, could you tell us a little bit about the reference model and the objects that you use to make the app function?
Yeah, so you're spot on, where building something from scratch sounds like a good idea at the time, and it usually is, but you then realize, hang on, I need to figure out and crack open Salesforce to see how files actually works under the covers. And there's nothing wrong with how Salesforce deals with files. It's actually very good, and it's very clever. So there's a couple of key objects when we talk about files. We're talking where there's a content document object and a content version, and these two are the foundation of the files that you see. The different versions and the actual data within the file that you upload are stored in these two. There's a third object called content document link, and that handles all the file sharing and references between objects and users and the files themselves, or the content documents. So that's what I've called out here in the reference model on the right. The two objects on the left, File Explorer File and File Explorer Folder, they are the two custom objects that deal with the file hierarchy and the architecture of Lightning File Explorer. So I've created a couple of references there between the two. There's a circular reference for File Explorer Folder, and that's just because a folder can also have a folder as its parent, as does a file. The File Explorer Folder template is an auxiliary custom object that we've created that is basically a conduit to hold a folder structure that can be reused in the other downstream records. And that's where I've put the S object in the middle that represents any Salesforce record that can associate two files.
Cool.
You can then have a File Explorer object model associated as well.
Cool. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, thinking about how you're storing those files and sort of that folder structure. But I think it would help if we move on to the demo and actually see this in action. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Paul, where we can go ahead and see the app and take a look at some of its functionality.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to quickly give you a rundown of what Files looks like out of the box and what it looks like after you've installed the Explorer. So here is a record. It's a contact record with a related list for files. And I've installed or uploaded a few files. Here they are. You can go into a file preview and you can navigate to the actual file via a few clicks. But when you're on the actual record, it's quite difficult to see whether there's any correlation, whether you've got duplicates, and how you can basically just categorize. Installing the product is fairly quick because there's only a few components and a few custom classes and a trigger. And what you'll see once you've dropped the component onto a page is this message, which tells you that you need to synchronize your current files, which you've uploaded, to the File Explorer. This message will only come up when there are files that we haven't already imported or synchronized with the File Explorer, i.e. files that have existed before this component was installed and attached to this record. So if we click this button, we'll see that we've got our files now imported into the Explorer. And now we're ready to either create a new file, folder, use a template, move, rename, and delete. So this context menu is only going to show you the actions that are available depending on where you currently are. So because I've just loaded this record without clicking on any of these items, it's going to know that I'm on a folder. Mm-hmm. And if I'm on the home folder, I can add a file or I can add a folder.
Cool. I mean, I think this is such a huge improvement on the UI that we're used to seeing now. I think it's really cool to see this in action.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephan. So I'm just going to quickly go through a record, which we've predefined a few files and folders. And I'm just going to highlight things like the inline search capability. So this will let you search via either the file name, the folder name, or a tag. And by tag, I mean once you load up a file into this preview, you've got a few other contextual actions that you can work with. So one of them is preview, which is the same as the standard file preview. The other is opening the file directly, so it saves you a click. Let me go here. Downloading the file directly onto your device, or editing tags. And so this is how I found or searched for originally using a tag, and I can add another tag like this, confirm, right? And if I just refresh, just to clear, actually, if I do this, behind the app.
Yeah,
so
that's really cool.
Yeah. I can also show another cool feature, which I think will save users a lot of time. And that is, once you install this product, you realize that, okay, maybe for a contact or an account or whatever record it might be, a project record, for example, which is something that one of our customers has decided to use this product for, is he's got a project record and he wants a consistent way of creating a set of folders every time somebody creates a new record. So what we've also included is the capability for you to define a template once and reuse it. And so this this template UI is cool because, first of all, and I can quickly show you later, how templates basically just reuse the same architecture themselves. But this interface lets you quickly either browse, sort, or search for a template, select, and hit confirm, and now you've got your folder. So your users don't need to manually recreate this every time based on the type of object that they might be creating, or even if you wanted to create maybe a set of base folder templates, all you need to do is click on the parent folder, hit use template, and it will then create a template or create those folders within this parent, which means when you're building out your templates, you can also create some base templates and within each of those templates, further create child folders underneath.
Cool.
This here is the folder, this here is the folder template object. And as you can see, we're just using exactly the same component. We've just obviously disabled file capability and just add, move, rename, delete, and use folder where you need to.
Cool. I think that's really, really cool to see in action. And I think it's going to add so much value to a lot of customers who are using a lot of files, which are most of our customers who are building apps like this. Cool. Brilliant. So I think we can go ahead into our next segment and we can look at what actually sits behind this application and how we can start to solve for X and solve for those technical challenges. Now, the first one we're going to talk about today is solving for the UI and how the team really built this great user interface on top of files within Salesforce, and how they've created just a really good file management experience. We're then going to look at solving for data and ensuring that the users can meet scalability needs when it comes to large numbers of files and really sticking to Salesforce's content document capabilities. Then lastly, we're going to talk about composition and how Lightning Web Components really drive that application as a whole and bring that full picture together so that when the user's using the app, they get a seamless experience that's always functional and gives that great experience that we've delivered through the UI and through the data. So the first thing we're going to talk about is solving for UI. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this team is how they've worked together with the full team in this design process. And Paul, would you be able to talk us through that design process and through the user interface there?
Yeah. So as any project goes, or agile project goes, there's design sprints. And our very first one was literally a sit around the kitchen table, brainstorming what would be a good idea for this next project. And because we quickly identified, hey, let's tackle the files UI, let's see if we can make that better. One of the more creative people on our team, and would you believe it, this is how talented and spoilt we are. This was actually designed by June, who is one of the lead developers on our team. She quickly sketched up this diagram and created a new marsupial at the same time. And this is more or less how our final design ended up looking like. This was, a 10-second sketch over lunch, and most of the times the prototype and the final design look nothing alike. But in our situation, version Homo habilis, if I'm referencing the evolution of man diagrams, that was number one. If we look at a more structured version 2 Homo erectus, this was sketched up, I believe, using Balsamic or one of those other design tools. And this was our attempt of just trying to identify the core components that we're going to have to build. So now we're thinking actual, task oriented architecture. All right, what components are going to likely make up how can we break it up across our team of developers and start working in parallel. Version number 3, Homo sapien neanderthalensis, was a design that Row mocked up for us. And now we're getting into the wireframe stage where we're also thinking about device. Obviously, we were looking at mobile first design because Salesforce is a very flexible platform, very flexible solution that works on many of the handheld devices. So our File Explorer also does, and that's where we were trying to identify which parts of the solution are going to be feasible in such a small real estate area. So the first thing you'll notice is the tree is actually not visible on the mobile, but everything else that we've shown is. So searching, tagging, and being able to drill down back and forth using the breadcrumb, that's all there. On the right-hand side, you've got, the final mock-ups, which come very close to what our design was. However, everybody who's ever written a line of code, and most people who haven't, know who Dilbert is and Scott Adams, the founder. He was ahead of his time. So extreme programming, I can give you all of these features in the first version, and each feature needs to have what we call a user story. Okay, here's a story. You give me all of my features or I'll ruin your life. That happens all the time. And unfortunately, we've still got a backlog. As anyone who's ever built anything would know, that backlog is a bottomless pit, right? It's pretty much it's a black hole. You can't ever close that off.
Yep, we've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Endlessly.
Yeah.
Over and over again.
Yeah. And it's you're kind of good and bad. When you're developing for yourself, you're a little less critical on what you believe should go in. But at the same time, you do want the best for your customers. Mm-hmm. So our final product, as we showed, goes or shows like this. And I think we hit, for the most part, everything we wanted. Mm-hmm. That was critical for a functional application. It looks, we used the Lightning design system for all the UI, so it looks very close to, if not on par with the platform. Mm-hmm. And it should be future-proofed because we've used best practices in the forms of, the Salesforce class names, tokens where applicable, etc. And so if any of those changes, these should adapt automatically.
Yeah, I think this app, and just looking at the screen itself, it's a great example of taking the design system as a foundation and really using those ideas and those design principles to really build out an app, and relying on some of those design specifications and sort of those templates that are given to you to really build out an app. I know one that really caught my attention and that we've discussed previously is this little dragging sidebar between the file explorer and the files itself. And having tried to do this before, I know that it can be quite a technical challenge. And so I thought it'd be great. Would you be able to talk to us a little bit about how you solved that?
Definitely. So this dragging challenge or this dragging piece of functionality that Stephan referred to is this window here, which lets you adjust based on your screen size, your resolution, also how many columns you might have on the screen, because the Salesforce app page designer lets you is very, very open to how many columns you might want to put this on, and also, if you wanted to do so, decrease the width of one of these columns and still drop the file explorer on. So actually on the UI, in the slides, it's actually ended up being very logical how we did it. Derek was the one who was responsible for the draggable resize component, and it was some very clever CSS. At the end of the day, all you really needed to do was, apart from the styles that showed the differentiation or showed the handle, the logic was all but 10 lines. Mm-hmm. And you're going basically through, after you have registered the handlers for the mouse operations, i.e. the down, the up, and the move. I'm just showing you the move at the moment. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of determining the two sections, left and right, and the two containers, and then calculating on the fly based on the mouse position, how far your offset is away from the leftmost side and the rightmost side. We've got safeguards in there so that you don't want to go all the way to the right, nor do you want to go all the way to the left, because it just doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, we stop you at a certain point, but then we dynamically adjust the size of those containers based on your mouse position.
So what I find really cool about this is, I don't know if anyone watching it caught the first episode of Behind the App, where we talked to Andrew Patterson about the multi-org security summary. This is almost identical to some of the work that we had to do around dynamic UI and creating a really responsive UI, and actually going out and working on calculating the position of the components within the page, so that we can place items properly. And I think it's just really reassuring to myself as a developer to see that a lot of us have come to the same conclusion when it comes to writing Lightning Web Components. I think it's great to see you tackle this challenge, and I think it's something that people can take and reuse. It's a pattern that I notice from things like when working in a console view and getting that console list view, where we get our different list views within this item, being able to select an item in that list. And I think it's great to see that put to practice and put to use in a custom component, and will be super beneficial to users.
Definitely synergies.
Yeah.
Across everything that we do. And yeah, once you start building something a little bit more complicated than a hello world, it's good to know that there's a lot of cut and paste available for you.
Yeah.
From a lot of these solutions. Yeah,
big time. So now, one thing that I wanted to touch on, I think it's time to move on to data, because I can't be the only person who's been burnt by working with content documents, content versions, and the whole file mechanism from a programming perspective. Could you let us know a little bit about how you've done this? And the first one we want to talk about was looking at the file previews. So I noticed that when you click on the document itself within the File Explorer, we get a great preview of the image. How is it that you accomplish this?
Yeah. Okay. So Ellie addressed this issue in terms of the file details section, and it was very clever what she found. After digging around the standard file preview functionality, there is this, and we've confirmed this across many orgs, there is a specific URL which points to a out-of-the-box Salesforce servlet here, which gives you a very nice preview screen, which has all of those drop-down actions taking you to the file, being able to go directly or download and go to the detail, edit versus view only.
Okay.
All you really need to do is add a version ID on the end, and it'll take it will form up that screen and give you the silhouette in the background with the highlighted file at the forefront.
I mean,
that's this. Yeah, that's the second line there, the file preview URL.
I mean, that's just looking at this. My jaw's kind of on the floor for a second, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone circles and circles in writing much more complex code to try and do these exact same things. And I think that's really cool and going to be really useful as well, that you've uncovered this functionality that a lot of us as developers can go back and reuse when working with files.
Yeah, and as you can see here, we're using the web component getter syntax, which will just check that a valid file version exists, always code defensively, and if it does, then return back this URL, which is nothing more than a source property of an image tag, and you've got the preview.
Cool. Yeah, that's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah.
And so then the next bit is, okay, let's talk about how you're working with that initial sync. I noticed that when you went to go and view the files, you have to press the button to confirm and ensure that all the files are in the proper format. How is it that you're doing that?
So we never sought out to replace files. So everything that you see in the File Explorer is a facade over the core native content document, and content versions, which means the files that you upload and the files that you share are still using those same records behind the scenes, which means what we do is we create a File Explorer counterpart record for each content document record. And why I specifically call out File Explorer is because that's all the file content document gives you out of the box. It doesn't give you anything to do with folders. So how this works is what we do is we check that we have, for the current record that you're on, the same number of File Explorer file records as there are related content document records via the content document link table, which you've no doubt worked with, Stephan, and it's probably given you a few grey hairs over the years.
Over the years, the last week.
Over the last week?
Last week, and working with a lot of the guest user changes on communities and really understanding the intricacies of how to manage those content document links when the user doesn't actually have access to the record. I'll be definitely releasing lots of content about that in the next week or so from sort of my explorations. But I think that's really cool, and really see the way that you've are sort of validating your app itself against the document so that you can really alert users when they need to just press the button and get everything back into the nice file folder format.
Yeah. So the reason why it's on a per record click and interaction is because we didn't want to get into a batch locking situation if your current org had hundreds of thousands or millions of files on there already. We didn't want to force you to have to sync and create records into our File Explorer table, because as everyone knows, even custom object records add up to your storage limits.
Yeah.
Right. So, without we didn't want the possibility of your org crashing just from an install of an app. That's nobody's wish.
No, definitely not. But I think that's good. That's good, and it's good to be mindful of file storage limits, because a lot of App Exchange solutions do use up a lot of data storage as well from records, and I think keeping that in mind is really, really good to see from an app developer. Now, just moving on from that, I know every good developer has their patterns for reuse. I noticed that you mentioned earlier about using templates and using that same component over again and just restructuring it. But I wonder if you could touch on some of the patterns that you used from a development perspective when building the app. I know you mentioned there were some that you had in mind that would be useful for anyone watching today to learn about.
Yeah. So one that I'd like to specifically call out is, and if I go into my IDE here, I can talk about specifically a item abstract class that we deal with, because at the end of the day, a File Explorer file and a File Explorer folder have a lot of the same properties and attributes. They each have a label, they each have a parent, they each have, what record they are associated with, record as in the linked entity ID. They have a created by, created date, all those very typical properties. So what we've implemented is a base virtual class which holds all these properties. We also have a interface which, if you wanted to use or derive from these classes, you would have to implement, and that enabled us to then use the factory pattern to quickly allow a developer dynamically on the fly instantiation of either a file or a folder based on a deserialized object coming in from the UI. Because if I'm saving or editing a file or a folder, I may not necessarily care what it is. All I really care about is that I want to persist that information if I'm allowed to. And so if I go to the controller, which was here, I'm posting an item, and by posting, I'm either saving or deleting. Either saving or inserting. I don't really care what it is. All I want to do is deserialize my object, create a concrete instantiation of my child object, and then I want to, do a little bit of data manipulation, and then hit save. I don't want to repeat this piece of code for a file, and then for a folder, and then potentially something else if there was in the future. Same with the delete. I just want to take it, deserialize it, create my child object, and then execute the functions that the users asked for.
Yeah, I think one of the best practices that you can follow when doing a lot of front-end work is to ensure that the back-end, in this case, your Apex, is simple and makes everything simple and easy to understand in the UI, so that you're not having to go through all of these different methods and functions to initiate a couple of simple tasks. Whereas here, it seems like you've created just a few entry points into the backend that allow you to communicate and seamlessly work with those files and create those files. And I think it's really good to see in practice. If users start to follow these patterns, will make their UI much I like to think it maybe more scalable. Is that the right word for that, or just easier to work with in general?
Well, 100%. I think scalable. I think maintainable. Everyone knows who's written a line of Apex that you need to then write a line of test code as well. And by keeping it, keeping it componentized in this way, you're writing one test class for all the save functionality, for all the delete functionality, regardless of how many front-end objects you decide to implement.
Cool. Great. I think that's brilliant. So let's go ahead and move on to our next solve for X. And this was internationalization. And I know we've both shared a lot of the same struggles when it comes to translations within Salesforce. Can you tell us a little bit about this challenge that you had within the app?
Yeah, so the long story short is a lesson learned is you can't underestimate how many literal hard-coded strings you as a developer put into your component, your application, whatever it might be, right? It's grows or it increases at a exponential rate. As soon as you start, building something out, the number of strings that you don't realize you put into your application to present a message, to present or a help text, a label, a validation, even just internally for you to categorize things, placeholders, that kind of stuff, it gets up there very quickly. And so for our File Explorer, which is arguably a fairly simple app, retrospectively, when we went to internationalize it and create the custom labels, there's over 75 custom labels just in that app alone, which is pretty high.
Yep. I can't tell you, every time I build something for a customer back in the day or built into the App Exchange, I always leave custom labels to the end, and I regret it and say that I'll never do it again. But it just it happens every time. But it is important, and we must all ensure that all of our apps are translatable into multiple languages, because our users are not just working in a single language. So no questions asked, always do it, but plan ahead and you will have much less regret than you can read on both of our faces at the moment.
Yeah.
Because we've all been there.
Yeah, our very first user of the app is a partner in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And Switzerland is surrounded by 3 countries that each speak different languages. So there's no doubt that he will probably have to implement in 3 different languages. And that's just enough reason for you to think about it at the start. Yeah,
exactly. 100%. So that's it for our data challenges. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on composition, because I think it's something that's sometimes understated when building out an application. And I wanted, if you could just talk through a little bit of the composition of the app. I know it's a lot of Lightning Web Components that sort of put it all together.
So here I just took what you and Andrew showed last time. Stephan, I hope you don't mind, but it was late and I was tired. So I've just broken it up into the different components at an abstract level, where they currently sit in the application, and we can quickly talk about how they communicate. So I think a best and recommended pattern for Lightning Web Components, if you're going to have more than one that need to communicate, you should always have a container object. Do you agree?
If we're looking at sort of something that's quite complex as this, or like the multi-org security summary, it's really, really useful, especially because everything's encapsulated. And so there's no reason to have the user drag multiple components on the page when you can really wrap them around and build it almost as if it's a standalone application.
Yeah, exactly. So you can always build each individual component, child component, as a standalone so that it can be dragged and dropped using an interface. But having a container, I found, is much more easier for someone and palatable for an admin at least, to drag one thing on there than 5 things and try to arrange how you believe that it should go, especially if it's a very commonly used component or components. So the File Explorer has a container, i.e. the File Explorer, and that is the main component that manages state, data, and the events, because we know that components communicate up via events and down via methods. And so there's a lot of components in the File Explorer that need to stay in sync, i.e. when you select an item in a tree, the search results need to change, the detail area needs to update with the preview, and the actions need to also change, because it doesn't make sense for you to rename a file in this scenario, because we've delegated all the file management back to the native file, out of the box file functionality. Likewise, breadcrumbs, search the results, as I mentioned, they all update. And if you do a search, similarly, the tree needs to update, and then the actions also need to change. So if you get a chance to view the source code, you'll see how we've done that, and I believe we followed the recommended best practices in firing, dispatching events, handling, in a structured manner. So I think a lot of similarities to how you described you built the multi-org component.
Yeah, I think it's really cool to just see these patterns start to emerge. And it's something that as developers, we've never discussed this. We've never discussed this approach to building our apps, but we keep stumbling upon those same answers and best practices from a lot of the app dev worlds, from the JavaScript world, and how we've really improved on how applications can be built on Salesforce. And I mean, thank you very much for going through that. I now have to give our shout out to go and download the Lightning File Explorer. It's a no-brainer. to just put this on your page layouts anywhere where you're managing lots of files and give this component to your users. And secondly, go and check out the GitHub repo because there's some really good code examples and some great patterns that were used with building this application. So go check out sfdc.co/file explorer to get the application. And it'd be great to see everyone share the way that they're using this app and some of their use cases. Now, just to follow up, on our next episode, we're going to be talking to the creators of the Chat Lightning Web Component Pack. And I'm super excited for this because they've built 8 different Lightning Web Components that exist within chatbots and allow you to really up the ante in that user experience that users are experiencing when using chatbots. And so please, if you want to check out that app ahead of time, it is available on the App Exchange now, but we're going to be talking to some of the creators of that and really digging behind the application and seeing some of those challenges that they faced when building that. And so first off, I have to say huge thank you to Paul for joining me on today's session, and huge thank you to your team for building this app. I think it's going to save a lot of people a lot of time and really help them when it comes to managing files on Salesforce. Can I ask, I'm assuming you had a great time building the app, but how does it differ from your day job? Do you really enjoy building things for Salesforce Labs?
We do. We really enjoy it because it gives us the opportunity to think about those little nuances that you don't normally think about when you're building something that is a proof of concept or a demo. Right. As frustrating as creating custom labels for internationalization is, or writing test classes, trying to get to 100%, it makes you better as a developer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think at the end of the day, anything that lets you think about how frustrating it would be if you were using a product that wasn't as good as it should be, is beneficial, to anyone in our shoes. So definitely it's worth doing every once in a while. I say that because, releasing something out to the public comes with, hidden debt, and it is, every time Salesforce releases, we need to make sure that the product is up to scratch and also works with the new version, which we hope it does. But yeah, it's one of those considerations. If you're going to release something, be prepared to make that further investment when it comes time.
Amazing. I mean, thank you again for your insight today. It's been super helpful and eye-opening. I've learned a few things that I want to take away and go and take a look at immediately after the session. And lastly, thank you all for attending today's episode. I really hope that you've also learned a lot from Paul's insight and the work that their team has done to build this really cool app. Please be sure, like I said, tweet #BehindTheApp to let us know what you thought of today's session or any questions that you have for myself or Paul. We will be back again, like I said, on the last Thursday of every month for more episodes of Behind the App. Thank you, and everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Stephan.